Good afternoon, people. Is it a heavy lunch? We are here with the CTO of the India's largest tech broking firm. Come on. We can be a little more chaotic than that. Okay, first question. How many of us in this room trade? I just got to know that this man sitting here, who's responsible for all of us trading, is least interested in finance, okay? That's just an insider tip. But if you have to, if we were all asked to think of, like, imagine the stock market 10 years back, what is the image that comes to our mind? Anyone can guess. Like, when you say the word stock market, what are some of those images that come to any image that comes to your mind? Like a big room, lot of chaos, people screaming on the phone, bech dal de, ab bhi bech dal de. Like anxious men, BPs going up and down. That was the image maybe 10 years back. But today, when we think of stock market, and when we think of buying or selling stocks, what's the image that comes to our mind? It's as simple as buying groceries on Blinkit or shopping on Amazon, right? And today we have the honor of sitting in the same room as that one human being or one individual who has changed the perception of stock market, not just for us in this room, but for our entire country. And that is Dr. Kailash Nath, CTO of Zerodha. Huge round of applause, please. But what's also absurd is that this person who's built the tech stack for Zerodha, which is today a $3.6 billion company, is not a software engineer by choice. He's a hobbyist software, and he built this out of his hobby of, his love for technology, or as a hobby software is what he has built the tech stack for Zerodha. He's, of course, a BSc in computer science and a doctorate in Hebbian cell assemblies, AI, and computational linguistics from Middlesex University in London. He's a self-proclaimed absurdist, and which I definitely want to know more about it when we start the conversation, who believes in frugality. I think they were a tech team of 35 people when he built Zerodha, and they had about 1,000 customers. Today, they're still a team of 35 people, and they have over 13 million customers. So welcome, Kailash. It's an honor and a privilege to have you amidst us as a part of our Guidewire Tech Talk. And in conversation with him is our very own tinkerer, Anup Gopalakrishnan, who's joined us. He's a VP of Engineering this is for those benefit of those joining us on Zoom. He's a VP of Engineering and based out of San Mateo, and lover of open source software and loves to tinker with it. And over to you both. I think today's conversation is all about discovering, tinkering, and poking at technology to find out what lies on the other side of what we don't see as yet. Yeah? Over to both of you.
Well, first of all, thank you all for showing up. And also, I don't know about you guys, but I definitely am excited to talk to Kailash about all the things that he has done. But we'll start off with where Lakshmi ended. Why do you call yourself an absurdist?
That's my worldview. That's my philosophy of life. Absurdism. In really simple terms, I don't believe in grand plans in life. And my personal experience all these years, how my life has been shaped, have been a series of lucky coincidences, right place, right time. It was a lot of hard work. You have to work, but never grand plans. And I think once you read enough history, you realize that history is always shaped by the tiniest coincidences here and there. We have a tendency to make really big plans for the next 10 years, 20 years, 50 years, plan out our entire life. All it takes is like one misstep to fall in that. So that's my philosophy of life.
Well, that's a good one. So let's hope we don't have any 5-year plans about what we need to do in Guidewire. Starting off again on Zerodha's success, if you don't mind, at least for the international audience or people who are not in India, can you, in your words, explain what Zerodha does? Getting back to the manual stuff.
Zerodha is a financial technology company today. We're a stockbroker. We offer financial products and services, trading and investment platforms that allow people to easily buy and sell stocks, participate in the stock market. This is our 14th year. We started building the technology team and tech products in 2013. The first 3 years of our existence was as a offering low cost investments. We continue to be low cost investment provider, but today we are also a large financial technology provider. And by activity and volume of the number of people who log in and buy and sell stocks on the Indian stock markets every day, we'd be the largest stockbroker, handling about 20% of all retail investment and trading volumes in India on a daily basis.
How does this compare to all the things that happen in the world? How are those stats?
I think I can't substantiate this, but I'm reasonably certain that we'd be the largest retail broker in the world in terms of activity. On June 4th, when the election results came out, markets were very volatile. We handled 35 plus million orders in a single day. All orders punched by individuals, human beings, retail investors and traders. So that must have been the largest for any retail broker in the world.
Awesome. This is great to hear. Round of applause for Zerodha. The next question I have is, you're a CTO, you're a member of the FOSS United Foundation, you're a member of the Rain Matter Foundation, you're a member of Indic Digital Archive Foundation, you're a member of the Samagata Foundation. How do you manage time?
I have nothing else to do in life. This is all I do 24/7, 7 days a week, but I enjoy doing it. So this is all I do, all of this stuff.
Well, I think we all need to take some notes from him after this session on how he enjoys all of those things. Now, coming back to the topic and point, right? We're all here to understand how we can unlock the potential of open source and drive innovation across our companies and the industry as a whole. Can you share what is your personal and professional view about open source?
My entire mental foundation of being an engineer, being a developer tinkerer is built on the idea of open source. When I first started coding, or accidentally discovered the idea of coding in my early teenage years, I was copy-pasting code I found on the internet, copy-pasting them locally, making tweaks, running them, and whatever worked, I was sharing it. I was pasting it back on the internet. And I didn't, at that point, when I was doing this, I didn't realize that this was a fundamental tenet of open source, where code is freely available to you to do whatever you'd like do with it, and you share it back. And after a couple of years of doing this is how I learned. I think every good developer is self-made, self-taught. You learn through trial and error. I figured this entire thing was called open source, and there was this concept of legal artifacts, open source licenses, etc. That I realized a couple of years later. But it felt so natural to me. How else would I learn? How else would anyone learn, right? If you can't freely copy-paste knowledge, tweak it, and share it back. So that's been my entire foundation, and that was 24, 25 years ago. And that's what I've been doing ever since. I've been working on hobby open source projects since forever. I continue to work on them today, almost on a daily basis. So when I have no affinity towards finance. I've never punched a trade in my life. So
this comes to the CTO of Zerodha, which is the largest brokerage firm in India. So
when I met Nitin is the founder of Zerodha. It was a completely coincidental meeting that happened in Bangalore. One of those absurd events. And stock markets finance was a greenfield for me as an engineer. I was really excited as a developer tinker, I was really excited by the prospects of building new stuff. And every developer wants to build new stuff. It's very exciting. That's how I ended up in finance. But what has worked for us there is we all have our DNA, we all have our lenses, and people with the right knowledge in different domains collaborate enough to produce whatever we produced. That's why I've never traded, but it doesn't matter. There are people who understand trading and finance there with whom, let's say, I collaborate. So when we started the tech team in 2013, the first thing I did was download Python, start writing Python scripts to slowly digitize the org from within. And what else could you even do, right? If you want a programming language, you'll download a Python or a Go or PHP. These are all open source systems. So 10, 12, 13 years ago, the world had already been consumed by open source. Today, there's no question of open source versus non-open source in that sense, right? Any piece of technology that anybody's building, you start by downloading high-quality open source components, your front-end frameworks, your back-end frameworks, your databases, your programming languages, your runtime environments. Everything is open source. So at Zerodha, that's what we've done. That's all I knew, and I wouldn't do anything otherwise. So we've slowly evolved, building. We've slowly evolved from a broker trying to digitize to a larger financial technology company that's built a lot of tech, all on open source components, always contributing back to the best possible extent. And Force United Foundation, for instance, that we started in 2010 in collaboration with our other open source enthusiasts, that was a reflection of whatever we were trying to do. And we continue to have those initiatives today. So everybody in our team is encouraged to produce open source software, to contribute back, to constantly think of what component we can open source, and to always use the best, highest quality open source technologies to build whatever we're building.
So just as a follow-up, so first things first, what I understand from what you're saying is that you started off your foundation for Zerodha from open source. It was never a change from commercial off-the-shelf software to open source. You always started from the base of open source. Is that correct?
That is right, but there's a nuance here. When Zerodha was started in 2010, there were vendor-based components that a broker had to use. Back-end pieces in the OMS system, order management system, etc., like a back office system. There were off-the-shelf products there. But when we started our tech team, but there was no tech team. It was just something, when a broker started out, people would come install these things for a broker, and that's how it worked. So when we started our tech team, we started out using open source technologies, building everything from scratch. All the new things that we wanted, we built from scratch using FOSS, create open source software. And once we found our footing, we started replacing the vendor-based components also with FOSS. And that can't happen overnight. That's been a multi-year long journey. So yeah, absolutely started with FOSS on day one, built everything using FOSS. And also migrated non-FOSS dependencies over a period of time.
Awesome. How do you differentiate what needs to be your IP versus what needs to become open source within Zerodha?
Very interesting about the financial organization in India is that there are tons of encumbrances and proprietary licenses, regulations that bind who you are, what you can do. So our investment platform, trading platform is called Kite. The way it should be structured, the options that should be shown on it, the version number that has to be displayed on its feed, all of that is regulated. So for anyone to even offer a trading platform, you need to have a special license. So even if you were to dump the code for a trading platform on GitHub, it would be useless because nobody can use it legally. Only a broker with the right licenses can use it, and that's just the trading platform. There are n number of other proprietary licenses an organization has to obtain from various exchanges, depositories, SEBI, etc., to even run as a broker. So you can't, in isolation, even open source. That concept doesn't even gel in this industry. Doesn't work. In the US, for instance, you can build an open source trading platform, and you can pick up any platform that you'd like, and you can connect it to any broker that you'd like, and you can trade. That's not even legal in India. So we don't look at Zerodha as an organization that can build an open source platform because you legally can't. But we're just looking at open sourcing whatever we can that is reusable by others from within our stack.
Okay, so now coming back to your teenage years, sorry, going back that long.
Those were cringe years.
I'm sure also the learning years, right? So what was the project that inspired you, or what was the scratch that you were, itch that you were trying to, satisfy with open source? Your first forays into open source, what was it that you were trying to do? Was it gaming? Was it, as a teenager, I assume?
I think... So before I started tinkering with code, I was always tinkering, that much I remember. I was tinkering with little mechanical gadgets, rubber band toys, wooden toys, paper craft stuff. I was always tinkering. And in in school, we had an electronics club where one period in a week would be dedicated to electronics, soldering stuff, building circuits, etc. So my tinkering immediately got uh, transfused into electronics tinkering. It felt natural. And when I got my first personal computer, and that in itself was a big coincidence, in the year 2000, to get a personal computer in a tiny unknown city where I'm from, uh, that in itself was an impossible, highly improbable event that happened for reasons I still don't understand. And that's why I'm an absurdist. But that changed my life. So when I got access to a personal computer, my interest in tinkering with electronics and little circuit boards immediately, it shifted to software, and that was natural. So I don't remember it being as a singular event where I suddenly got interested in software. I think it was a natural extension of whatever I was trying to do. This urge to do something, create something, build that little thing. And software is limitless. I mean, it's intangible. Hardware is limited. You need to solder, you need to burn your hands, you need to buy stuff. Once you use a board, it's done. So it just felt very natural. And my first big breakthrough came through when I managed to publish my first big open source project. It was a blogging platform. Came out in 2002. It's called Beam Machine. Uh, GPL licensed it was, and that became big. It had, and this was the early days of blogging on the internet. There was a thing called blogosphere. Blogspot was there. This was pre-WordPress. There was a WordPress's precursor was called B2 Evolution, and then B Machine came out. I must have been, I don't know, 15 years old, and then it found a large user base. It found a community. It found contributions before Git. There was a forum. There were tons of people. There were hundreds of thousands of blogs that ran on the internet using this piece of software. And I was working on it, tinkering with it, building it every single day after coming back from school, sitting in my little bedroom in my home. And that joy and satisfaction was intense, immense. And I never looked back.
Awesome. Thanks to B Machine, and I hope we have Zerodha now. But going back to the drive for innovation within enterprises, right? How do you think, in your experience all across, how can we unlock that that drive within enterprises to cater to open source, not just by using them, but also contributing back? What are the things that you've used within Zerodha where you've encouraged or gotten your people encouraged to contribute back to open source? And how is it that we could emulate that in other organizations?
I'll be blunt. You need management buying. It's a culture. Pretty sure most of the products that you build here, they all use open source components, frameworks, languages, etc. They're all open source. I think in organizations, small and big, the management has to create room for the culture of contribution and sharing to evolve. You need constant encouragement. And over a period of time, it becomes a way of thinking, way of doing. So at Zerodha, from day one, because we are using open source technologies to build stuff, and I'm an open source hacker myself, it was a no-brainer to find people who had such an inclination to join the team. So the culture permeates, and people are constantly encouraged to build and give out stuff. Now, it's not in isolation from work, where you say you do your Zerodha work, then you do other open source work and push it out there. It doesn't work that way. It's a way of thinking. In any large complex system, you'll build so many components. You look at it from a certain lens, you will realize that, oh, other people out there will also have this issue. Maybe I can make this a little generic and push it out there. And that needs to be a culture. That way of thinking has to be encouraged and instilled by technical leadership and management. And over a period of time, it just becomes culture. Everybody does it on their own. Nobody comes to you saying, oh, I have this idea. People just open source.
Absolutely. So it has to become culture and it has to permeate through. But if we were to talk about management who are largely non-technical in nature.
Tyrannical.
Now that was a strong word, but how can we help those people in management at that level to understand, or let's assume that they have the blessings, they've given the blessings. What are some of the things that you've followed or you could suggest to companies as programs that you might want to do to encourage open source? Other than, encouraging people is not a one-time thing. It has to be constant. And then you need to have programs of some sort that will sort of, make it easy and permeate into the culture. What are some of the things that you might suggest to such non-technical managers?
I think to make non-technical management understand the value of FOSS, you simply have to show evidence. Your product only exists because you picked up an open source language to write the product in. Product only exists because you picked up an open source database. Your mobile app only exists because you have picked up an open source framework. Otherwise, the product couldn't even exist. So it's very easy to list that down and show evidence, and maybe even put dollar values to it, saying we couldn't even have built this product if it wasn't for all these open source components for which we paid nothing. So let's pay something back. It could be financial, it could be code contribution. So this can be quantified as a financial report even, if it comes to that. You just show people what is being used, how much you paid for it, which is zero for most 99.99% of FOSS. And you can also institutionalize some of this. And you were just telling me about the OSPO idea that you have. That's a great way of doing it. And it will have some open source program office. It will have some programs and activities that give structure to this. You could have a contribution drive to contribute to valuable projects that you derive great value from. You can do financial contributions and let the team pick and choose. Ultimately, developers who work with these technologies know best. They know how valuable this tiny piece of library is to the stack. So we have a system where people who use various libraries, etc., in the tech team, they can just say that this thing is really, really valuable. Let's donate to it. And we have a FOSS fund internally. We're going to expand it and announce it soon, next month really. And so a developer has the ability to voice their support for a piece of technology, open source technology that they really like and use. And we, the org, donate money to it because we're deriving value from it. So that also gives agency to the developers who are really working on these technologies firsthand. And that instills the culture of giving back. Giving back can be financial, it could be fixes, it could be new projects themselves. And just simply getting together and thinking, sitting, brainstorming and deciding what could be a meaningful open source project that you could carve out of the work you're doing right now in itself is a collective exercise. Like I said, over a period of time, it just becomes culture. Nobody has to think of it.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. So a big round of applause for Zerodha announcing funds for open source. It's not, we have to remember, majority of these people are working off of their, regular office hours and spending times in the evenings. There are some hugely used open source projects, be it Log4j, curl, etc., with very few contributors who spend a lot of their personal time. I'm not talking about Linus Torvalds or other people, but just talking about even regular projects. So it's great that Zerodha is instituting a fund that will help these open source projects, be more viable.
Because you mentioned curl, we actually sent money to curl, just appreciating how amazing curl is.
Absolutely, it is amazing. One of the best softwares ever. And I want to, touch a little bit on the OSPO part, which is about open source project management, program office, which is about how do we institute within organizations institutionalized process around what and governance around open source, right? It's about, for different companies, the focus could be different. Some could be about retaining talent. For others, it could be about, the stack is important to us, so we want to have a say in it. And third, it's security. All of these combined could become a governing factor within OSPO that would help bring programs as well as TechTalks and all of those other ways that you can encourage open source drive within your organization. Do you have an OSPO at Zerodha?
I think we are an OSPO.
That's a
we
nice
don't
way.
have a thing called OSPO because we just started
That's
out
part of the
being,
culture.
Yeah.
That's great. So as a CTO within your organization at Zerodha, are there specific open source projects that have been like game changers for you? Or almost everything, you use all of them, but is there any one project that you might think is has been absolutely critical for Zerodha from the open source world?
There are multiple, but I always cite Redis as an example. And Redis has had a very unfortunate turn of events in the recent months. A heavily VC-backed org takes over its maintenance. Suddenly, it's no longer open source; it's been forked. But that's the beauty of open source. The community will fork it and maintain it. Redis has been instrumental. I think around 2013-14, I was tinkering with Go, which was a nascent experimental programming language from Google, and I was building little projects in it. And for this one particular use case, after evaluating a bunch of other languages and frameworks, I decided to give Go a shot at Zerodha for building one component, and that worked out really well. So we built another one and another one, and today I think bulk of our stack is Go. So Go has been absolutely instrumental to us. When we hire let's say we rarely hire, but when we hire a developer and let's say they're a Python developer, they're able to learn Go and start contributing a little bit within a couple of weeks. In 3-4 months, they're writing fluent, proficient Go code, contributing to critical systems. That's the simplicity of the language. So developer productivity, the ability to collaborate, etc. in Go is quite amazing. And like I said, Redis has been rock solid. It just runs forever. I mean, nothing ever breaks. And absolutely stunning piece of software, Redis. There are several, but these two.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I know we are also tinkering around with Go in Guidewire. There's some projects out there. And we are, in fact, having a Tech Talk next week. This is a shameless plug-in for the Guidewire folks. This 24th, we have a Tech Talk on Go. So now you talked about hiring. What are the key attributes you look for in an engineer when you hire folks into Zerodha?
Skills for sure, but more than skills, the general attitude and expectations. So we are a very small team. When we started the tech team in 2013, it was just me, and then we had another hacker, our first engineer, and slowly over 11 plus years, we've built a small team of very closely knit people, and everybody's a full stack dev there. So the ability to learn is, I value that more than their current set of skills. Somebody doesn't know a certain language, but if they have that knack of learning, meta understanding, they'll pick up that language in 2-3 months. That's okay. So we don't really look for very specific skill sets in a certain language or framework generally. That's rare. And expectation and general attitude in life is something that is weighed heavily on, and you can figure those out in a few casual conversations. So we don't really want rockstar 10x ninja engineers in our team.
In other words, you don't want brilliant jerks.
We don't want that sort of an archetype. Some people are very skilled. Some people may not really be that skilled. I mean, that's natural. But we want everybody to collaborate with everybody else and help everybody else. So that whole idea of a superstar developer becoming a silo in themselves is not something that we want. So we have a small team of developers who all collaborate with each other, irrespective of how skilled they are. And expectations also. I mean, every person that I've hired, I've told them that 80-90% of the work that we're going to do here is super boring. But that is true in any company, anywhere in the world. There's a misconception that at Google you get to work on cutting edge innovation every single day. That's not true for any org in the world. 80% of it is really boring maintenance stuff. 20% would be those bouts of excitement and innovation engineering. So I set the expectations very, very clearly, and that these are the risks that you deal with. We are in a heavily regulated industry. So the people who are okay with all of that and not some world-changing whatever, those are the kind of people who have come on board, and they've all stuck around because they're there for the right reasons and right expectations. So that's how we hire typically.
Okay, that's awesome. What do you guys do for fun?
Lots of things. We play Counter-Strike every day. We're still playing. I think we play Condition 0 1.6. I think it's 25 years old. Low poly,
MS Paint level graphics, but it's so much fun. We still play it every single day. We're very competitive about it.
That's
Yeah. All kinds of things, but this specific.
awesome.
And I am the best at CS.
I can imagine. How about hackathons? Do you guys do anything of that sort? Sometimes hackathons can help, if you look at a way to mutate your thinking, right? Otherwise, you're going in one strand all the time, and this helps you mutate. What's your idea and thought about hackathons and running them on a regular basis? So, what do you do them in the first place?
We don't have structured hackathons, but we have lots of R&D projects, and that R&D run or sprint to replace something or try something out in itself becomes kind of like a hackathon thing for a small number of people. It may run for a couple of days, few weeks, or even months. So we constantly have a large number of small little R&D projects running, evaluating a whole new way of doing something. And every teams are tiny, 2 to 3, 4 people. And these projects constantly have overlaps between people from teams. So no structured hackathons, but actual stuff that has to be built for the org, which is a part of our ideas of improvement or future plans or whatever. They become small little hackathon-like R&D projects, and either they fail or they succeed and become a part of the mainstream. Yeah. So that's how we do it. It's become cultural. We don't even think of it like a hackathon. It's just something we do.
So something like an innovation sprint that you do once in a while, or is it like...
No, it's fluid. It happens on a daily basis. It's a part of all projects. It's a part of our workflow.
And when you approach any of these projects, is it with the intent that you ask yourself, is this open sourceable? Is this idea open sourceable? Or you focus first on solving the problem and then looking at after if it's open sourceable?
I think problem first. If you go with the is it open sourceable angle first before the problem is well understood, I don't think it will work either way. We understand the problem first. We arrive at a certain solution after R&D. Then we realize, oh, this is generic and it can be open sourced or it can't be. So it's like that. And to give you an example of an R&D project, let's say we have a large database with humongous amounts of data. Some process is taking an hour. It used to take 30 minutes 2 years ago. Now it's taking an hour. And that is a signal for us to relook at it. And it's possible to keep it at 1 hour. It's affordable for us to do it at 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours. And 6 or 7 years down the line, it might end up being 8 hours, but unmanageable amounts of data. So we always look for those stress points within the system. And then suddenly there's a small little experiment. You know what? There's this new database called ClickHouse that we've been reading about. Why don't we do a POC in it? And somebody will pick that up as a project, do a POC, spend days, weeks, or months on it. And the outcome will determine the future of this project. So every single large technical change in innovation we've done has come like this. So today, ClickHouse is a great example. We've inducted ClickHouse heavily into our stack. We've benefited from it immensely. And it started out as a POC.
Experiment.
Yeah, as an experiment.
So what I'm hearing is that micro innovations that happen every time is a way of life at Zerodha.
That is how everything works at Zerodha. And micro can become mega in no time.
In no time. Yeah. And how does this start? Is it usually something that is bottoms up in terms of people realizing the time, or is it more like from your level down, identifying, at a higher level things are untenable at this pace, or how does innovation happen?
It's mostly from the ground up. We don't really have a hierarchy. We don't have any hierarchy in the tech team. So everybody's kind of clued in on everything just enough. And people who own certain products and projects, it's become a part of our culture to question when something slows down. Look for those signals. Something's taking 1 hour, but it ideally shouldn't. That nagging feeling. So somebody just brings that up. Like, this could be better. A bunch of us sit together and look at possible pathways, and somebody picks it up as a project and does a POC. So
the counter that I have seen in my experience is people tend to get into a Stockholm syndrome. This is how it's worked all the while, so this is probably the way it should go. How do you tackle that? So you said this great thing about question everything, right? And that again is a cultural aspect that has to, I think, permeate from the top. question everything, even and allow the bottom to question upward too.
Absolutely.
How do you encourage this on a regular basis? Is it by, I mean, probably by demonstrating it yourself, or what other methods do you follow? Is there any management method to this, or is it, you know, as you said regarding absurdist, being an absurdist is just do it?
I think it's very difficult to create a program around this. I think then it'll end up being something like agile, where it backfires and doesn't work as originally intended. You have to set examples. You have to show success stories, obviously, and that would have been for when we were a young org. I do this myself, and I've also learned quite a bit over the years. And people around me, people who sit with me and work with me, they also learn by example. And at some point, it becomes a muscle. Now, if you question absolutely everything, nothing gets done. So it's a trade-off. This isn't right. It's okay. It's acceptable for it to continue like this for a while. And this isn't right, but this can't go along. You know, that sense, it becomes a muscle in the collective conscious of the team. And it starts emerging. But yes, absolutely, this has to be set from the top, just like all culture is set, from the early days until it becomes a muscle in the team.
So I'm assuming that Zerodha has some open source projects that are heavily used by other organizations as well.
Yeah.
So what's your experience managing those projects? Is it more like herding cats or conducting a symphony?
It's a bit of both. Some projects have a lot of users and no issues. Such projects are great. Nobody bugs you. Some projects will have a large number of users and therefore a large number of questions, large number of complaints, or large number of questions, just questions, not even complaints. Nobody wants to read the manual. Everybody will compose an issue saying, tell me or teach me how to use this or do this. So it's a bit of both. And that load is shared between the principal project maintainers of those respective projects, or in general, if it's a shared project, somebody or the other from the team will go respond, etc. So their experience will, I think, in the open source world, it'll always be mixed. And it'll depend on the kind of audience you have. If you have a dev tool, something that's aimed at developers, it'll have a different kind of response. If you have something that is aimed at non-technical people or projects, that'll have a whole different kind of dynamic about it. So it's a mix of everything.
Okay, so now for most of the people here, I can say, at least the tech folks, is that everybody's used open source. Almost every engineer in here and on Zoom, I'm sure has used open source. But then the challenge comes to how do you contribute to open source? I've obviously heard a lot of my share of reasons, but what are some of the reasons that you thought were sort of interesting on why people don't contribute back into the open source world?
There are many reasons. For me personally, it's a matter of value and principles. If you're taking something and using it heavily for free, if you're deriving value, it's only ethical and moral that you give back. I'm a hacker, I enjoy giving back. That's another contributing, that's another thing. But generally, the apprehension stems from mostly misunderstandings. How do you contribute to a large project? Will your contribution match up to the quality expected by the project? Will there be a rebuke? All of these feelings are very natural, and a lot of open source projects have douchebag maintainers. And if you send
I named one in this.
So these are all valid reasons. And you build something, but it's too tiny. Why should I do this? There are so many people doing bigger things. Why should I even contribute? One of the JavaScript library that I recently open sourced was 500 bytes, some 100 lines of code. Really, really tiny. It was a cool hack. And I was happy open sourcing it. I'm pretty sure a bunch of people use it for various things now. So whether something is useful to others or not, I think it's very hard to predict. Even the most niche, obscure, tiny thing that you end up building may end up being useful to a lot of other people. And you can't predict that future or its trajectory. So you have to put it out there. So you have to lose some of your inhibition of opening up. And even the tiniest contribution, even documentation contribution. In fact, I would love documentation contributions. Developers hate writing documentation. Even those are extremely useful. I mean, I want documentation contribution more than code contribution, because reviewing code contribs are a huge mental drain. So you should just push that tiny little thing out. And some of my biggest projects have started out as tiny little projects that have just changed. And that's true for every single open source developer in the world.
And just to add for everyone in here, GitHub has labels for many of these issues that are there in the open source world. You could search for good first contribution label or things like that, where you can easily contribute back. I've heard reasons where people said, the open source maintainers could be judgmental. That's one, like he said.
Many are.
Like he said. But that shouldn't stop you from, having that conversation. In fact, I feel that the more conversations you have with open source, and diverse open source, not just focus on one project, is you improve your own developer capital. You improve your own ideas and thoughts that that could help you become a better developer. And you should never look at it as, oh, it's about somebody judging me for the contribution I have made or the comment I've put in. It's okay to get rejected. Your PR is rejected. It's fine. You can always raise a new one based on the feedback they've given. So you're always improving yourself, right? Think of yourself as a versioning system that is incrementing your patch version one after the other.
I'd like to cite an example here. So it doesn't have to be a contribution. This is not the example that comes next. It's not really about contributing to large projects. You can always open source your little hacks. And most open source projects, including Linux itself, has been the result of somebody's frustration. You get so pissed off with this problem, nothing really works for you. You do that library, you do that little tool, you write that bash script because you're so pissed off.
Mm-hmm.
So the origin story of some of the biggest, if not most open source projects out there would be pissed off people. And my example is from 2010 when I was in the university. I'm a Malayalam speaker, that's my native language, and I was really pissed off at the lack of a quality Malayalam dictionary online. And there were a few ones, SEO-ridden, spammy, horrible websites. You'd search for a word, it'd take 15 seconds for it to load. And this would drive me nuts for years. So in 2010, I got so pissed off that I sat down and I think took an English dictionary and typed out some 5,000 English to Malayalam words. And I was in pure rage. Then I made a little web app around it and I published it. Then for myself, because I was so pissed off. Then I scraped together a bunch of more words, and people added a little contribution form. People started contributing to it. And this was an open source project, and the data was also open data. And the project's been running it's called Olam. The project has been running for 14 years now, and today it's used by 2.5 million Malayalis every month. So
Awesome.
It's an open source, open data project. It's out there. And over the last many years, I've greatly enjoyed working in it. And that's also been spun off to a Kannada dictionary called Alar, which is also now gaining a lot of usage. But I couldn't have foreseen where this would go. But when I look at this project and I think of the value it brings to so many people, right? Such a simple thing, a dictionary. That can't be replaced. This could not have been planned. Now, if I wasn't pissed off back then, or if I hadn't channeled my rage and angst to a simple open source hack like a tool, it wouldn't have happened.
The moral of the story is not to get pissed off, but
Always
what
be
happens
pissed off.
after. If you
Always
get pissed off, make sure you make an open source contribution. But that's awesome to hear. And the other thing is that you never know how big your contribution can become, right? When you start off, you're being a harbinger of an issue that you're facing, and then you never know how others are going to take it from there. And that's a great feeling if you're especially an open source author. So again, like he said, be pissed, but then don't just remain pissed. Fix it.
Open source your anger.
Now, talking about instances where you've used open source projects, has there been projects where you took some project that seemed cursed from the beginning of sorts? We can all relate to some of those things, and then suddenly you had to take ownership, or Zerodha had to take ownership and turn it around. Has there been any such projects in the open
So
source?
you're talking about K8s?
Could be anything.
Thankfully, not too many. That's
Okay.
because before we pick up a piece of technology and induct it, we do this R&D thing.
Mhm.
We test it out, we build a POC, we batter it, and we get to a certain level of confidence before saying, "Oh, this looks good enough." It seems like a safe bet. So thankfully, because we've done that with almost everything, we haven't really been hurt much. But there have been a few libraries, etc., that have completely backfired, which we've had to, firefight. But the trick is to do a proper technical objective evaluation and decide based on that level of confidence. That has saved us over the last decade.
That's awesome. Do you worry about the economics of open source projects? Is that something that comes to your, as we all agree here about the amount of impact open source projects have in our lives, because everything, right, from our phone to a lot of things that we do, are shaped by open source. But then there are not as many contributors back into the open source world as there needs to be. Do you worry about the fact that it is becoming a problem of pandemic proportions of corporates mostly just using and consuming and not giving back?
Yes, I do. And the question of sustainability, financial sustainability in the open source world it's been a really big question mark forever. And over the last few years, the debate has become extremely heated. Elastic's licensing fiasco, MongoDB's license, and the most recent HashiCorp and Redis, right? These are all symptoms of this particular problem. Way back, open source technology was built by enthusiasts, put out there, and users, individuals use them, small little logs use them, other hackers use them and contributed back. Then, with the massive commercialization of the internet, and all of us are a part of it, over the last decade or so, over the last 10, 15 years, it has become a really big problem. When you have trillion-dollar corporations consume open source built by two people who are struggling to pay their bills, and they build multi-billion-dollar enterprise on top of FOSS, again, built by people who have nothing. That's unethical, outright unethical, but there's no legal boundary of it. So FOSS licenses, the ideology was crafted in an era that didn't really foresee all of this. It was mostly about developer freedoms. But users today are not individuals. They are trillion-dollar corporations, billion-dollar corporations, right? And that disparity is a huge, huge problem. Thankfully, it's a big point of discussion and contention also. And we're seeing, things like Open Collective, GitHub sponsorship, etc., etc. These are all slow models that are emerging. There's widespread criticism of large organizations consuming and extracting from open source. It's all out there in the mainstream. So I'm hoping that some of these models will emerge, or some of the other model will emerge that will address this to a large extent. So even the FOSS fund I said we're going to announce, we as an org, in our organizational capacity, have been sending money to projects that we derive value from, stuff that we use, that we like. But our next step is to do this FOSS fund that's open to all FOSS projects in the world, where you can request for funding globally. So I'm hoping more companies will do it. It's yet another model. We need a large number of models that will start tackling this problem. And I'm hoping it will happen in the next 5-10 years.
Do you see yourself in Zerodha leading that effort to build a collective, not just of each company having siloed programs, but having one singular program at the top that will help fund these open source projects? Or do you expect every company to sort of have their own siloed processes around funding?
I think it should be a mix of both. Any sort of one umbrella, model that is large and centralized will not be good. We need all kinds of models to emerge. We need multiple collectives to emerge. We need multiple individual efforts to emerge. So our hope with this is, of course, we want to genuinely fund open source projects, which is why we're doing it. But our other big hope is that this maybe pressurizes or inspires other organizations to also...
I love the word inspire.
I like the word pressurize to also try stuff like this. These are all models being tried.
And you talked a little bit about licenses. This is also where I think we have the strong copyleft licenses versus the permissive licenses, be it LGPL, GPL to MIT, Apache. Where do your thoughts reside? Because sometimes the LGPL, GPL also becomes, in a way, it will prevent these other companies coming in and taking over things. But it also sometimes prevents adoption itself for legal reasons, whatever be so. Where do your thoughts lie on these licensing models present within the open source world?
I don't really have a set view on this. I think different scenarios, contexts, projects, environments have different licensing requirements. I have personal projects that are AGPL licensed. I also have personal projects that are MIT licensed. And I pick based on some loose criteria that I have in my head. But people should pick the licenses that they want. All of us want adoption for our projects, but you shouldn't be candy wrapping your project for some hypothetical trillion-dollar corporation or multi-billion-dollar corporation to come pick up your project and use it. I think you should really forget about that and focus on quality. That's been my experience. This AGPL licensed project, it's called Listmonk. It's a newsletter manager. I've been working on it for 6 years. It's AGPL, and I think Google has an explicit policy that says that we will not use AGPL products.
Right.
But recently I found out that one of the departments of the US federal government has a Listmonk installation. I think they send newsletters, I don't know. So it doesn't matter. You should have a decent license that is appropriate. Like you shouldn't have an AGPL license on a CSS library. That would make no sense. You should focus on the quality and usability of your product and have a decently appropriate license, and there will always be users. And the large organizations or corporations who have a problem with the license, they don't have to use it. They can make their own or fork or whatever. So that's my viewpoint, and this I've seen it play out.
What is your loose criteria that you use to make sure a project is either AGPL or MIT?
So MIT, for instance, if it's a small little library and a few hundred lines or whatever, MIT makes more sense. Take it, remix it, do whatever you want. But if I'm putting in tons of effort into a project, and if somebody's making improvements to it, I'd rather see those improvements come out in the open. So Listmonk is AGPL because it's also a web app. It's a network serviced app, which is why it's AGPL. And AGPL is specifically for networked projects, things that can operate as SaaS. And I like working on it. I spend a lot of time on it. If somebody's using it, if any large org is using it and they make changes, I'd rather see those improvements come
back into the main project itself.
Yeah.
So we've talked a lot about what Zerodha is doing and what it plans to do in the future. What trends are you seeing out in the open with regards to open source, and anything that's on the bright side, and what do you think are some of the things that concern you in general? But from your vantage point, what are the things that you think are going to be great for open source?
Open source has completely consumed the world, so that's great. Everything runs on open source. There's no denying. Absolutely everything is built on open source. The number of open source projects that come out every year is immense. The quality of FOSS is just unimaginably, it's amazing. Back in the day, there used to be this thing that, it's open source, it's not user-friendly, this other thing is user-friendly. All of that is flipped. The best quality UX today is in FOSS projects. And Microsoft is the biggest global supporter of FOSS right now. That should tell you something. So there is massive amounts of money coming into FOSS. I don't know if it's good or bad. I mean, the jury is still out. There are entire venture capitalists who've started FOSS portfolios. There are VCs who go on GitHub, sort by stars, and write to project developers saying, I'm a VC, I'd like to fund your project. So money coming into FOSS is great, the sustainability question. But VC money coming in, what sort of money, what's its dynamic?
What the outcome is.
I don't really know. But yeah, these are the trends. And then, of course, we have amazing FOSS projects flip and become open core and non-FOSS, like Redis, etc. That's concerning.
Cool. One last question. Do you have any open source projects or ideas that are still in the crazy phase, or you're thinking about to open source? Anything that you would like all of us to follow?
I have a to-do list that stretches back 17, 18 years. Every developer has. One day I will work on this. It's a text file, it keeps on growing, and I never look back. I really don't like looking at that file. So there's that. But there's a large update to the dictionary coming, very large update. But what I've spent quite a bit of time over the last 2 months is on version 4 of Listmonk, with multi-user, multi-tenancy, OIDC, etc., etc. I like working on it. I don't even know why, but I keep working on it. But that is something that I'm very excited about, and I think this will make it organization friendly. So Listmonk could only had one super user. You could log in as one user and maintain your newsletters, etc. But I see that a lot of companies use it, government departments use it, NGOs use it, and you need multi-user access. So that's what I've been working on. It'll come out hopefully this month. So that's been quite a lot of work.
Well, good to hear about that, and thank you so much for all the questions you patiently answered. We're not done yet, because we're going to turn it over to the audience to be able to ask questions. So do we have a mic that we could pass on, please?
I was saying the other day, drinking water during interviews is a very sensitive thing to do these days.
I won't ask the reason. We can talk after.
This is a question for both of you, since both of you are open source stalwarts of your, in your own way.
No, I don't compare me to him.
My question is about so adoption of high maturity projects is always an easy decision, right? But organization adoption of low maturity products is something that I'm curious about. Like, what is your view on how it gets absorbed, especially when there is no support, right? Mm-hmm. How it eventually matures into something. How would it even mature into something that is like a spring? That's my question.
So, if I may repeat your question, you're asking about low maturity open source projects? Spring is one of the most supported projects in the world.
I'm saying, how does a low maturity open source project, eventually, like, what is the trend been like? How does it eventually become a spring?
Okay, I'll let him.
Are you also asking about one's decision? How do you decide to use it?
Yes, well. So how does an organization, because there's no support for it, right? So then the organization has to spend their own, sweat capital into that, right? So both, I guess.
It's a trade-off and it's a risk, but there are a bunch of things that you can look at. You can do a technical evaluation of the project itself to kind of gauge its quality, its extensibility. And if you can, if you really need to use it and doesn't have support, you can evaluate whether worst case scenario you can fork it and maintain it yourself. And if you have the ability to do that, that's the biggest sense of liberty you can derive from a project. And one example I could cite is Flutter, Google's mobile framework. We started evaluating Flutter in 2017 when it was pre-alpha, and I don't think there was any serious Flutter project in the world on the App Store. And our trading platform, I think, was the first serious Flutter project ever to hit the markets. We spent several days. In fact, we have a very long blog post on this particular topic, describing the entire journey of evaluation. So we had such a big issue with React Native there. We'd rather, it was okay to bet on an experimental pre-alpha project than live with React Native. So you have all those trade-offs. Then we did a technical evaluation and realized that even if Google killed the project, Google never kills projects, right?
No.
So
just need to go to the graveyard.
Even if Google killed the project, we'd still be okay to run Flutter in that version for at least 3-4 years, which would give us ample time to figure something else out. We also figured that some of the quirks it had then, we could put in some effort and iron those out. So it's a trade-off, and you have to look at it very contextually and take that bet.
Just to add to what Kailash said also, if your question is about open source projects, let's say, started within Guidewire, or is it
No.
outside?
Not really.
So then I subscribe to the same view. If it's critical to your application, then you better have contributors into that open source ecosystem if it is critical to what you're doing. Example is we have Kubela, which is something that we have been now contributing to very consciously as the maintainers have sort of stepped down to some extent. So if it is critical, make sure it's part of your regular development effort.
So thanks, Kailash, for the inspiring stories. My question is on where do you see the Indian developer community contributing to this open source software?
Great question.
And do you,
Great question.
what else do you expect the developers? There's a lot of engineers out here. So what do you expect? Where do you see India and these building, starting projects rather than expecting someone else to build it and contributing to it?
So if I may also just tag on to that question, I think I saw some survey results. We have large amount of developers. I don't think we have as many amount of open source contributions. So that reflects from the question that he's asking.
You've just triggered me. This is a very touchy topic for me, and one of the reasons why we set up the entire FOSS non-profit foundation in 2020 was to address this one particular issue. So on GitHub, there are about, I think, 16 million developers from India, which represents the single largest developer demographic on GitHub in the world. But you look at the number of projects that come out of India on GitHub, we rank amongst the lowest. And that disparity, that it's so disproportionate, it's sad. It makes me angry.
Should make all of us angry too.
And I've been thinking about this for many years. Why is it so, right? And the entire Indian startup ecosystem, the mega boom over the last decade plus, has been built on top of FOSS. Every Indian startup has developers working on React Native or Flutter or Python or whatever, right? Everything is open source. Why don't we contribute anything back? And anecdotally, lots of thinking, lots of interactions with industry folks, startup folks, developer communities, students. I think maybe the key to this is a cultural problem at the management level in the industry, because engineering students in colleges, typically the ones doing engineering, they're so excited to contribute. They participate in hackathons. They're so excited to build stuff. People keep asking, how do I contribute, etc. So where do they go? Where does their enthusiasm go to die in the Indian industry is what I've understood. So they find jobs, they end up in large and small companies, startups, etc. But then they vanish. There's nothing coming back. How can that be, right? It goes back to our early conversation. This has to be a culture that is set from the top. A tech company's management that uses FOSS should have this culture ingrained from day one, or they should make an attempt, at least give developers and engineers an avenue, at least an encouragement to contribute back. Most orgs, like 99.99% of Indian orgs don't have it, and something that pains me greatly. So yes, it's actually kind of a shame that we represent the single largest developer community in the world, and yet we also produce practically no open source contributions relatively.
Well, let's hope the people here in this room are going to be agents to change that.
Be pissed off. Hi, Rahul. Great to have you here. My question is around licensing. We were talking about it a bit earlier. I ran into this one while contributing to something last week. It was a CLA agreement that I had to sign up. So what's your view on that? And more importantly, would you encourage contributions to projects that force you to sign a CLA? And would Zerodha ever make something open source that requires a CLA? I'm not a fan of CLAs, but I wouldn't outright dismiss them. Certain projects, the CLA is an agreement where the developer says that I'm contributing something, but the maintainers and owners of the project are free to relicense the contribution at a later point. That's what a CLA is. And many large projects force you to sign a CLA before you contribute something. And it's not a great sign. Why would a project that has a good open source license need a CLA from others unless they have a plan
to change.
contingency to relicense at some point? So I'm not a fan of CLAs, but I think there could be those rare occasions where some projects may have to have a CLA. OpenStreetMap relicensing was a big example of like a legit CLA thing. They had to go after thousands of developers and get their consent later to do a change that was really warranted. But generally, for large projects, it's not the case. We would never do a CLA. I mean, I'm not a fan of CLAs, and I don't have CLA on any of my projects. Thank you.
Behind you.
Yeah, I have one. Is it working? Okay, so my question is related to machine learning.
Can you hold the mic near?
Yeah, is it am I audible now? So my question is related to machine learning. I found out in the intro that they introduced like you have done your PhD in machine learning, which is really great, like in 2011 around that area. But since you've been working Zerodha, so this question is for both of you. What do you think this machine learning in fintech or in Zerodha? I have seen like in Zerodha where you guys are not using machine learning. So is there any plan about using machine learning in Zerodha in future? Or again, this question to both of you. Do you think machine learning or open source projects that we have currently will be useful in either Zerodha or in Guidewire? I know there are a couple of projects in Guidewire, but any major plans in Zerodha or in Guidewire to use machine learning and make it more user friendly or make it to reach more people or something?
Do you want to answer that first?
So at least for Guidewire, I know Douglas isn't here, so I can't speak for his department. But that said, our aim is to use a lot of open source projects, right? I mean, machine learning, and if I look at models in general, there's a lot of growth that is happening in the open source world. You go to Hugging Face, you can download a lot of models in there. These are all most of these are foundational models. You'll have to build things that are contextual to your industry, your how your company works, etc. I do feel over time that this will also expand to such an extent that there's a lot of things that would be common in nature that you could give back to the industry or to the open source world. There's always going to be a danger in how much you open source there. Some of this could be IP related, could be regulatory. Insurance is also one of the most regulated industries in the world. So there could be those restrictions in play. But if you look at the ecosystem around it, be it like, for example, running models in smaller models in, let's say, K8s. I know you don't like K8s, but still, I love K8s. So there could be things like that. So there's tools like Bento ML, etc., how you could run simple models. So we could expand our footprint into those ecosystems to make it easy to use and run models for developers, right? Right now, you have to handle a lot of infrastructural components to be able to get there. So I think in that area, you will see an explosion of open source tools. And then over time, it'll consolidate into a few good ones that everybody can use. But that's what I feel.
I think the question shouldn't ideally be framed from that perspective. Will Zerodha use machine learning? That's like asking, will Zerodha use databases or will Zerodha use... Machine learning is a very, very broad term. It's an entire field, it's an entire spectrum. So it would be a very solution first, problem second sort of a question. If there's a certain business use case that requires the use of a certain machine learning technology, then any company, including Zerodha, would use it. Over the last 10 years, we haven't had to use any sort of machine learning models or AI models, despite my background in research being that. But over the last 2 years, since the really big transformer LLM breakthroughs, we found some very interesting use cases after the release of a lot of open source models, where we can self-host certain models and solve certain problems much better, than what was possible before. Certain problems that had no solutions today, suddenly have solutions to some of these models. So we've been experimenting internally. So it should be like any other technology. If there's a specific problem it will solve, you can use it. You will definitely end up using it. But it shouldn't be really looked at from a top-down manner.
To answer your question, Guidewire does have machine learning models that we use. We have an entire team about it. So,
Yeah. Question there? Yeah. So actually, I wanted to ask.
are you sure the mic is on? Because,
Yeah. Am I audible?
yes.
Okay. So you said that Zerodha kind of operates millions of orders each day. So how the fault tolerance works, like because it is quite time sensitive, right? In between, I was hearing about some orders were getting placed but not executing. So how do you kind of work around that? I was just curious.
It's extremely complex. There was an issue last week, I think July 12th, where for 30 minutes, BAC, the exchange, couldn't fulfill orders. Orders were going through, but they hung there. And to even figure out that it was a market-wide issue with the exchange, it took a while. So every single client across a number of brokers who were trading that particular segment had their orders stuck. But we got murdered on social media. It got incorrectly attributed to us.
Because the fast feedback happens through Zerodha, whereas
Yeah,
others
yeah.
might be slow.
And it's natural because we have a large number of people trading, and it's natural. So this was one of those rare occasions where orders went and hung in the exchange, and then everybody had to wait for 30 minutes for the orders to be unlocked, and brokers couldn't do anything. Nobody could do anything. It was a new scenario. So the markets are so complex. The level of activity in the Indian markets have skyrocketed so much in the last 4 years that every few months we see a new scenario that has never played out before across exchanges, across brokers. The week prior to that, we had an issue, unfortunate issue in an old legacy component that affected a small. Thankfully, it's a distributed architecture, so if there's an issue, it's contained to that shard of, and users are sharded there, which lasted 20 minutes, where your order updates wouldn't refresh, and it happened in a manner that was never seen before. So it's very difficult, and you have to try and envision all possible edge cases. You have to learn from whatever goes wrong, and you have to keep building these metrics. So we have an automated test suite of some 860 or 900 tests that run again a bunch of parameters throughout the day, trying to these systems try to give us early warnings. So any issue that happens in our stack is despite all of this, despite all the rigorous testing, despite all the whatever technology we built, all the mechanisms we have, despite an 860 rule test suite running constantly, trying to warn us. So it's extremely complex, and the Indian industry, the stock markets, the scale it's seen in the last 4 years is unlike ever in the history of the markets. So the entire landscape, including all the large institutions like exchanges, brokers, are all evolving, and I'm hoping that in the next 2-3 years, we'd all have stabilized.
Yeah. Kailash, thank you so much for all your stories. They were very inspiring for sure.
Sorry, who's speaking? I can't see.
Here. Kailash, my question is pertaining to you. You shared many stories about how small projects were hosted as open source, and it helped a lot of people out there, right? And this is where my question comes from this publishing strategy perspective. One of the fears that many developers or many open source contributors or want to contribute have is that they put out something there, but it may not reach the right audience or the right community to get the necessary feedback. It's similar to the pressure a content creator feels on the social media platform, right? Now, do you have some tips to tackle that from a publishing and marketing strategy perspective?
The reality is that 99.99999% of the projects that are published don't find any users. So we just have to accept that the odds are low. So the odds hinge entirely on the quality and usability of a project. But if your project finds 50 users, that in itself is a big deal. That puts you in the top 10 of all FOSS projects out there. So you have to have a realistic view of the landscape. And the best discovery platform are today's big code sharing platforms like GitHub. GitHub in itself is slowly transforming into a social media like system, which I'm not a fan of. But if you have a good README, if you've tagged it properly, GitHub has categories, tags, etc. If you have images, if you have a demo, etc., it brings users in. So ListMonk, this example that I cited, the only thing I did was I had a demo. I click here to see the product in action, demo setup on day one. I had a nice README documentation, etc. And I remember also posting it on Product Hunt. And somehow it got 100 users, then word of mouth, and over many years it's picked up a lot of users. But when I released it, it was in a very, very raw shape. It was a pre-alpha version, and it took 1.5 years or 2 years for it to even become stable at 1.0. So just put an effort into making your project presentable and using the utilities of things like GitHub that are there for discovery, and that works. GitHub itself drives traffic to projects.
Yeah, so the crux of the matter is being persistent, right? Like you said, 99.9%
In life, with everything, yes.
Exactly. Thank you so much.
I think you had a question there.
Hi Kailash, my name is Piyush. I'm from Manup's org. I would like to know why you don't like Kubernetes and what is the specific reason behind that? Because again, the Kubernetes is a mammoth of among the
You
open
answered
source
the
projects.
question yourself. It's a mammoth, and it's
Yeah, but there is a huge community support and it's doing well. Almost most of the companies using Kubernetes for their infrastructure deployment. And what do you guys use? I am presuming that you are not using Kubernetes for your infrastructure deployment. So what you guys use?
So one other thing before you answer is that just because everybody is using something, it should never be the reason why we tend to use it.
Correct.
Right? It has to be contextual. So let's erase that for a second, and then I'll let him answer.
Yeah, I would like to know his perspective. Why not using Kubernetes?
So you'd asked me that question, what were those failures, post-project failures? K8s was one of those. We actually used it, piloted it, slowly extended it over a period of 2 years, and it just didn't work out. So our goal wasn't really to scale the features of K8s that allow you to scale, etc. That wasn't really the goal. Our goal was to have a uniform developer deployment packaging experience. And we started moving small little projects, and we ended up with a nightmarish hell of nested YAML files, YAMLs within YAMLs. In fact, we had to build and open source multiple tools that would help us handle YAML files. And this is despite our programs having very few dependencies, having been designed in the old school, 12-factor, whatever way, etc. And at a point, it became a drain. We wanted developers to quickly write manifests so that they could participate in the uniform. That smile is very telling.
that smile is because that's exactly the problem that we're trying to solve by extending Kubernetes in our way. But please go ahead.
I think it's unsolvable. That's the very nature of K8. So it backfired for us. Maybe it works for many orgs. I have no problems with that. But at Zerodha, it failed spectacularly, and we put in so much effort over 2 years. Then we switched to Nomad, HashiCorp's Nomad, and it's such a simple system. Everybody can see what goes on instantly. It takes like a minute to install, deploy. Your app goes and runs in a Docker container or a raw instance or a chroot shell. And the manifest for an average app is like 25 lines. And I can read somebody else's deployment manifest, the HCL file, and understand it in 10 seconds. And nobody today complains of deployments anymore. That's the greatest sign. Nobody spends time on writing deployment manifests. And it's a super, super simple system with much fewer abstractions to run. I also remember K8's, some weird K8's quirks. It has a proxy, Q-proxy thing. We have to transmit massive files amongst services at the end of the day, huge data dumps that there would be TCP breaks, there would be TCP failures where Q-proxy would just stop transmitting a file. What do you do? Where do you go debug? It's such a rabbit hole of layers and layers of complexity, and we really shun complexity like that. With Nomad, you know exactly what's going on. It'll go run your app wherever, and it's very easy to understand, visualize. So,
our use case was setting a platform for our customers, right? So a context where we started using Kubernetes is very different from where he's coming from. His is mostly a SaaS level application is how I would see it. We were like selling platforms to customers to develop on top of. And we build the abstractions there, but that is not saying that Kubernetes is not complex. It is complex. Hence, we build abstraction. Now the question is, how do we build non-leaky abstractions? It is an effort. It isn't done in a day. I think we've gotten to some extent.
You should set up a small sprint R&D team that evaluates Nomad.
We used Nomad before. We moved from Nomad to Kubernetes for certain cases. Yeah, absolutely. Like I said, it's case by case basis. I'm sure.
Yeah. It didn't work for us. It may work for others.
You mentioned a 35-member team is built and managed.
Can you hold the mic closer?
So you mentioned a 35-member team is built and maintaining the chip. So just curious, what is the development process, the testing process, how that efficiency is possible?
Automation.
Huh?
Automation.
Yeah, tons of automation, and you have to write software that is simple to understand, maintain, extend, so that somebody can pick it up and work on it. So it's not one thing, it's not one framework, it's a collection of a lot of principles built over a period of time. You have to make every single service that you write so simple that it requires very little maintenance. Automate absolutely everything, that things run on their own. Have software engineering principles, architectural patterns, etc., that help you keep everything small and simple. So we don't have microservice hells. We don't have dozens and dozens and dozens of microservices. The entire trading and investment platform is a collection of probably 4 or 5 services, meaningfully split. So it's a lot of those practices that come together that allow a small team to build, maintain, and run large systems. And this is the same team that runs, installs, maintains, and runs all kinds of internal applications also. Even our employee intranet portal where people log in and apply for leave, that's also an open source system that we maintain in-house. Our support ticketing system, we don't use a SaaS. In fact, we don't use any sort of a SaaS product for any of these things. That's also another open source system that we install and maintain.
Do you have teams that manage these internal applications as well, or is it like more
shared responsibility? There are teams, but there's so it's an open source system called OS Ticket. It's a support ticketing system. We picked it up and installed it 10 years ago. It still runs. We upgrade it once in a while. It requires so little maintenance that 2 people who are responsible for it, they have to log in once a year or once every 6 months to look at it. So you make those choices to get battle-tested technologies. You don't have a mesh of 100 things that talk to each other. You have 5 things. So you have to simplify you don't use something like YAML, nested YAML and K8s. So all those choices matter. Oh, testing is standard. You have unit tests. Yeah, you have unit tests. You have integration tests. Then we get our extended support, etc. teams to test these things. There are first beta testers for any product release. Then we also release user-facing products on a private forum to selected customers also. So many layers of automated testing, unit testing, integration testing, human testing before something actually goes live. Not a fan of those labels. They're just too rigid and they always backfire. So TDD forces you to think in terms of tests, which I don't think is a great way of doing it. Yes, you need tests, but you can't think. Your entire worldview can't be test first. I mean, that's my view. Depends. We sometimes feature freeze to make an improvement for weeks and months. Also, it all is contextual. But thankfully, in our industry, there's a silver lining. There are aftermarket hours. There are weekends. So a lot of things we reserve for weekends. Okay. So that's a silver lining we have in this otherwise real-time industry.
Okay, we take 2 more questions. One from this row. Anybody here?
Yeah. Here.
Go ahead. We'll take 2 more then.
This is Rajesh.
There are 2 points which I want to share. One is appreciation for the Zerodha. One personal experience I would like to share it here. Last month, I just went to my bank where I have my salary account to open the second trading account. Maybe during the conversation, I found that one, it's taking a lot of time, complex procedure. Sitting in the same bank reception, I just opened the Zerodha account in 12 minutes. It is the last month. I really appreciate the simplicity, user-friendly, how exactly a common man or whoever it may be, as in having one mobile phone can open the trading account. Only thing I was about to need that one white paper, some code I need to write and make that selfie. I really appreciate for that.
Thank you.
Second thing, I also understand that the FOSS and the Rain Matter, you opened that foundations. Any thought process why you could not able to put it into kind of a Zerodha foundation, which is a more branding perspective or maybe user acceptable perspective, rather than that having the 2 different foundations to support our community?
It's a choice. It's by design. It's Rain Matter Foundation by Zerodha. But corporate foundations do amazing work, but there's a bit of a problem there. We want all of these institutions to have their own identity, have their own philosophy that really permeates from our philosophies. We don't want everything we do to be tied to a corporate entity. At the end of the day, we are a for-profit corporate entity, and we don't really know what happens tomorrow. So it's our choice to not mix our corporate identity with every other project that we do, especially in the social sector. But I think people know that it's Rain Matter Foundation by Zerodha, and that's enough.
And the last, maybe you also mentioned that this month or next month something is going to be given for the NGO space perspective for something you mentioned in your talk.
I think our FOSS fund.
Okay.
Yeah.
Which can be used by NGOs to have a platform. Something.
Not NGOs. It was primarily for open source projects.
Yeah. Okay.
Cool. So there was one question here. Can somebody pass the mic? Okay, we'll come to you.
Has a mic. He has the
we'll come to you after him. Let him finish the question and then go ahead.
I'm a Zerodha team and I have been using Zerodha for more than 8 years now.
Wow.
So like there are a lot of integrations in Zerodha, like Tijogi and a lot of useful graphs that we are using. So for an open source like community or even a startup to integrate into Zerodha, what are the specific criteria you have in mind? Like there is data related things and like a lot of insights into the market. So what criteria do you have for integrating those external apps?
So all of the integrations that you see are also startups that we've funded. So we launched our Rain Matter Capital Financial Fund in 2016, and this industry didn't exist. So we've been funding startups to create this ecosystem of technologies that provide value around financial markets. So confidence and trust is the biggest factor. We evaluate it based on that. And because these are all integrations that you see are startups that we ourselves have funded, we've known them from day one, and we also have skin in the game. So the ability to trust that integration because of the very sensitive nature of the entire thing is the single biggest factor.
Okay. Can you pass the mic? Okay, go ahead. This is the last question.
So hey Kailash, I had a question about open source contribution. So I'm sure a lot of people would have innovations about, like you already mentioned, about maybe lack of competency, whether my contribution would be good enough, or am I good enough to contribute or not. Did you, when you were starting, did you face that, or if you did, how did you kind of overcome it?
He was contributing while he was a teenager, so there was less inhibitions then.
I think I didn't even. My first FOSS contributions came when I was 13 years old, I think. So I don't think I even had that mental markup of maturity to even think of this, no inhibitions. And I thought everything I was making was the best thing in the world, plastered it all over the internet, That's why I said those were cringe years. So now that I look back at some of the things I posted, etc., I mean, but that's what a young pre-teenager would do. So I guess that turned out to be like a huge factor of luck for me, that I started out in an era where nobody had innovations on the internet. You just plaster. There was no Git. There was no. Force was a hacker. It was a proper hacker space.
SourceForge.net.
So yeah, it still exists.
It still exists. That used to be the GitHub back then.
Mercurial. There was
Mercurial,
no.
yeah.
So I'm glad I got lucky that that was my mental markup, and I came from that era. And by the time I had matured as a developer, I figured it was okay. You can publish whatever.
So then, what do you suggest that one should? I mean, obviously, you should just put
Be
it
young.
out. Huh?
Be young.
Be pissed.
Be young. Be pissed.
Anup,
please complete your question.
So what do you think that any, let's say, a person who has spent 5-7 years in the industry, what do they think? I mean, what do you suggest they should do to come out of that, that shell that, okay, you're competent enough, you should do it. You should try at least.
You should try. That's the only thing. No amount of lecturing or inspiration will work. You need to build and break. Every engineer has to build and break and learn by trial and error. You need to publish projects. If they fail, but you need to keep publishing. So she was asking me earlier, there's like 50 plus projects listed on my website. But I was telling her there are thousands of projects that I haven't listed. All the tiny little failures over the last 2+ decades, right? I've only listed what I really liked, that I was proud of. But there were countless little hacks and projects that have just failed. So there's a big survivorship bias at play there. It's not that all my projects are big. Most of them are not, but the ones that did well, I've shared them. And lots of projects that I published also have just faded away. I've forgotten about them on the internet. Doesn't matter.
I think one other thing I'd like to add is that you're most likely using a lot of open source projects within your own team. Right? Why not look at some of those projects and see what they've listed as issues that you could take up, right? Things that are important to your team. Instead of waiting for somebody else to do it for you, you could contribute that back. Find a teammate you want to pair with, or do it independently. But I think take the plunge. There's no shortcut to that.
That's the best place to start. Fixing problems in technologies that you can relate to, that you're very familiar with. You can't just go pick a random project on GitHub and contribute because you don't understand it. So look around, you look for problems that piss you off and solve them.
Thank you.
Yeah. So I just have one last question. Yeah, here.
We'll take the last one.
Yeah.
Okay.
So this is Arjun here. So I just want to know whether Zerodha is planning to get into Web3 space, building anything on that. No crypto exchange.
I don't like the word Web3. I've written a blog post saying the entire thing is a sham.
Okay.
Web3 is a sham. It's dead also.
Okay. Can you elaborate a little bit, like why it's a...
See, Web3, there's no clear definition for what Web3 even is. What is Web3? I mean, who came up with that term, right? Where is the clear spec or definition? There's some blockchain here, there's some NFT, there's some token. You combine all of that, suddenly you're Web3. It makes no sense. So my entire view on this whole Web3, it's on my website. There's a full blog post that should ideally answer your questions. And it's also been riddled with scam and spam. And the entire blockchain stuff has had now 10, 14 years to prove itself. There are some use cases. It's a piece of technology at the end of the day. This whole Web3 thing has a huge marketing fad. And where is Web3 now? I don't even hear of it anymore. The last 24 months, it's just faded out.
I'll go through your blog, yeah.
I'll piss you off.
No, I think Web3, I felt it was at very early stages just to bring it to fruition. And there are folks who are really not, having confidence on the fiat currency and looking more into a decentralized economy and stuff. I thought it's very early stages. So just wanted to know your point of view.
I mean, yes, fiat currency, foreign reserve, centralization, these are all large problems. But blockchain and NFTs are not really the solution to that. It could have been, but it's been overrun by spammers, multi-billion-dollar scams. FTX collapsing was a big deal, right? So those are different socio-political discussions, fiat versus distributed.
Yeah,
but I don't think Web3 blockchain is the solution.
Yeah, you decentralize the currency. Along with that, you decentralize the problems too. So,
and which government in the world would want to lose the power of maintaining the currency, right? It's a political problem, not a tech problem.
okay, thank you. Cool. With that, thank you very much, Kailash. Let's all give him a round of applause. It was amazing having you, and it was wonderful talking to you about all the open source stuff. I hope everybody here and on Zoom are sufficiently inspired to pick up, or pissed, to pick up the next contribution into the open source world. Thank you all.
Thanks. Taylor, thanks so much for coming down. I've been following up with Kailash for quite a long period of time, almost 2 years, you don't remember, to get him to a venue. And again, thanks for coming down. Yeah, we have a small monitor for you.
You spelled my name right because it's spelled wrong.
Yeah, this is taken care.